and I think once we know our life song, that we understand God's value for us, that gives us the strength and ability to focus others in that direction, Yeah.
It's really good.
All right, well, welcome to a very special episode of the Shock Absorber podcast. My name's Tim Beilhartz. I am the children's minister here at Soul Revival Church. Joel, our digital pastor, is on a very well-deserved break this week, hoping to take his family down to the beach, which is a little pertinent to our story today. But I'm joined here by our regular co-host, Stu Crawshaw.
G'day, Tim.
How you feeling this morning?
I'm feeling great.
Excellent. And our special guest this week is Dave Lovell. Welcome.
Morning, how are you guys?
G'day, Dave.
Dave, we're here because you are part of an organisation called Christian Surfers, and so we want to hear about the story of Christian Surfers as an expression of missional ministry, which is one of the paradigms we've looked at over this season of the Shock Absorber. But first, just wanted to introduce yourself a little bit to us. Who's in your family? Tell us a little bit about your current role in Christian Surfers, and then we'll sort of head backwards in time and hear about the history. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, Dave.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this. It's actually the first video podcast I've done, so
Yeah, right.
cool inaugural experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I said, my name's Dave. I live in the Sutherland Shire. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Wendy. Been married for over 30 years now. Got 4 kids, all grown up, 2 grandkids, and life's pretty good at the moment. But I was actually born in the UK, so I was born down in the surf country of Cornwall on the far south coast of that country. And so I guess that's where my beach origins began.
Great. So currently you're the regional coordinator for New South Wales at Christian Surfers, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So what does that mean for you? What does a day-to-day, week-to-week look like for you in that role?
So it's a voluntary role. It means that I sit as part of the national team. We meet 3 to 4 times a year, try to face-to-face. The last 2 years have changed that paradigm significantly, so we just spent a 4-day weekend now doing a strategic plan for the next 3 years. But my weekly role is really looking after the beach fronts that we have a presence in through my area. So I probably mentor about 30 young leaders, and I keep in regular contact with them, pray for them obviously, support them through the resources of the movement. And we really tend to individually look, so that with CS there's not really one plan fits all or one model fits all. The model is that it's an organic movement, but we look at each beachfront community and the question is, what do you see as the greatest need and how can we meet that need? So it's a constant process of relationship development, evaluation, and just walking out life together, really.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We're going to hear a lot more about your history and the history of Christian Surfers and how what started here in Sutherland Shire has actually become an international movement, but more on that in a little bit later. We like to start every episode by talking about a cultural artefact, and you've been, just before we started recording, we were talking about a really fun one from your experience. You want to give us a little bit, some of your favourite cultural experiences?
Yeah. Well, surfing and music was formative in my younger days, like being born in the early 60s. And so my formative years coming into the early 70s, I think surf punk sort of formed my memories in my youth. So one of my most memorable experiences around that was, if you're into that sort of genre of music, you may know the Ramones.
Yep.
They're an American band, but I was travelling in my early 20s and ended up in London. And I was hoping to actually see The Clash, which was another major punk band in that time that I was into. But I saw the Ramones were playing down on Brighton Hotel Pier, so we ran down there on the train and managed to get tickets to get in there. Walked in the door and realised we really didn't look like we were the surfers, we were the travelling surfers with long hair, T-shirts and jeans. But the rest of the pub was just wall-to-wall London punks of the early 70s. So if you think or know of the Sex Pistols, that's what it looked like. And once the music started, it didn't really matter who we are. And I think that's a good model really to think about. Like, does it really matter who we are? You know, we can still enjoy life together. And we were in the middle of the mosh pit. My wife's quite short and small, but she loves the music, and she was getting knocked down on the floor. They'd be the first ones to pick her up and carry her, you know, and it was just an awesome night. There wasn't one breath of trouble, just pure enjoyment.
Did they do the whole safety pins and the mohawks and all that?
Oh, yeah, that was all full on.
So what year would that have been?
That would have been maybe 83 or 4,
Yeah,
maybe.
unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you like Radio Birdman as well?
I do.
Yeah.
Great Australian band.
They're a great Australian band. Yeah, I love Birdman.
Rob Younger's classic.
Yeah, he is.
I think he still lives down there, Illawarra there somewhere.
I think so.
Yeah.
I've seen him live at Sydney Uni a couple of months before lockdown, and they're still going.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They're in their 70s, I think, and they were rocking on too. Yeah.
Once it's in your blood, it's in your blood. A bit like surfing.
It is.
So this season of the Shock Absorber podcast, we've been asking the question, does the youth have an image problem with the church? And so as we think about the Shock Absorber model, we're thinking about listening to those who are at the forefront of cultural change and how listening to them help us to adjust as a church. And so a shock absorber needs the flexibility of those who are younger and those at the forefront of cultural change, and it needs the strength and the stability of the institutional church, those who are older in the faith, and so those two working together.
Or even just adults too, hey Tim?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so the other thing we've been talking about this season is different models of ministry. And we've been talking about the missional approach was one that we looked at. Chap Clark was the one who wrote up that chapter in the 4 Views of Youth Ministry. And his critique was that there is a number of church ministries that sort of stay within the bounds of the church and don't get out to where those who wouldn't otherwise have proximity to the church would be. And one of the things we wanted to do with Dave today was to celebrate Christian surfers as a great example, probably the most successful missional movement to come from Australia, which now has this international presence. So we want to tell that story today in the podcast. But Dave, you were saying just before that all of this kind of starts back with you as a very young child in Cornwall. Do you want to tell us a little bit about growing up and some of those pivotal moments for you there?
Yeah, and that's kind of in retrospect, but I guess the concept, as I've become a believer in God, you know, is that He has a unique and innate song for each of us in our life, like our life song. And, you know, Ezekiel chapter 3:7 says, you know, just draws that beautiful picture of God singing over us. And Jeremiah describes that He knew and formed us, you know, before we were even born. And so as I've grown into who I am, I have a strong realization of that. But as you know, inferred, I grew up in Cornwall, and obviously where you're born is where you're formed. And I loved the beach. You know, it was just part of who we were. My mum was an Aussie. She'd come to England as a doctor and married my father there, and so they started their family in rural Cornwall. She'd take us to the beach whenever we could. And so they decided to pack up and leave there when I was about 5 or 6. So 3 of my brothers and myself, we were taken down. This is before Instagram and take your favourite photo, but we were taken to a local art gallery. You know, my dad was actually a bit of an artist, and so he said, choose a painting that reminds you of where you came from so that you'll always have that. And so I remember choosing this painting of I just saw it. This is the beach my mum used to take us to. It's called Gunwallow. And so I saw the painting, and it was a fairly bland, but that's what I liked about it, is this empty seascape of a beautiful wild beach, but tucked right up in the back corners, this 16th century church, and just nestled into the cliff. And that still hangs on my wall, you know, because only, you know, about 10 years ago, I began to realise that was somewhat prophetic over my life. But that took a long time to form, you know, because I left Cornwall with my parents, and by the time I got to Australia, and it was a big upheaval, I think more for my parents than myself, but I mean, it was probably we're all in different spaces of turmoil. But as I ended up in school, I was the little pommy kid with a sort of rich plum in the mouth accent, and that pretty much attracted an undeserved beating every day because I was different. And so that sort of, you know, in that concept of having that life song, you know, our passions and purposes, I think that robbed me of that, because my whole focus became on survival and surviving alongside my brothers and protecting them. So yeah, that's kind of where my life in Australia began, and it kind of carried that theme and a whole lot of poor decisions that went with that well into my 20s. So quite an extended period of time before the Lord managed to redirect me. Yeah.
How did you become a Christian?
My family were Christians as they grew up, but I think as we grew up, but they, I think that whole fight for survival and the way that we grew up, really experiencing, you know, bullying and racism, you know, if what we talk about today, without, you know, making it sound too much packaged in that area. But I think just that whole decision of mine, like I was the eldest, and so I fought and I protected them, and well into our late teens and 20s, we were fighting and partying. But I think I knew that song that I mentioned before was always there, you know, but we become distracted from it because of life. But I remember being at a party, and the host was, or the father of the host was actually a Jewish gentleman. And so I got into a alcohol-fueled conversation with him, which was very amiable, but I thought I knew more than I knew, because I sort of had these concepts of the Old Testament, and I started talking to him about Judaism, and it was a good conversation. But in the middle of that, I suddenly realised people were standing and listening, and people started to say, "Dave, what do you know about God? You know, what about this? What about that? Oh, remember." And it was kind of a joke, but it was like a sudden moment where my whole world just played out before me and crashed in on me. And before I knew it, I was laying on the floor, and I've been known to lay on the floor at parties before, but different reasons, you know, but like I was lying there crying, going, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I didn't even know what I was sorry for. But I realised as I left that God was breaking me. And I suddenly had this realisation that, is this the life you want? Or do you want to know who I am? It was like God was speaking to me. And so really from that point forward, I had to make a decision. So my mates didn't see me for ages. I was just working it out, you know. And so, yeah, there was other things that went into that, you know, formed that, like in the midst of that sort of space and working my way through that. Wendy's dad died in a car accident, which was real and raw. But I remember clearly that the police came and they were talking to Wendy's mum, and we were there, and they said, "So, you know, this is what he can be charged for," and so the young fellow that caused the accident, where he died. And she goes, "Oh no, I don't want to press any charges, like just he's suffered enough." And I'm there going, "You serious?" You know, this is me, my innate fight to survive. Just show me where he is and I'll go and take him out, you know, like. But I remember thinking, how can she say that? You know, I had no tangible connection point with forgiveness and what that was about. And so in the midst of that party experience and that, it became a life search to, wow, like where's that peace? Where does that forgiveness, where does that come from? You know? So it was a very that moment, but it was a growth process over a few years of deciding to, okay, let's attend church with Wendy's mum because that's what her dad used to do, and just searching that out until one day it became very real, and Wendy and I decided, yep, this is real. We got baptised, we got married, and that was that.
And what church was that in? Was that Gymea Baps?
No, would have liked it to be.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
It wasn't Gymea Baps. I used to started attending a church with her, which was St George's Anglican at Hurstville. That's where they grew up. And then we went to Oatley, Oatley Anglican for a while.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But then as soon as we got married, we started our own house church. And for 5 years, we ran our own house church, which was kind of like a Timothy experience. I didn't know much, and yet I was running this house church, and it was a bit like how CS started, I guess.
Yeah.
Yep. And so in this process, you've got your love for surfing, you've come to know Jesus. How does this start to culminate in what would become Christian Surfers? Tell us that story.
Yeah, with that love for surfing, I intimated that was birthed out of just loving the beach from when I was young. But in that whole experience of being a young guy at school and just fighting to survive and being in my community, I met a couple of guys, because I got moved around a couple of schools. But I met a couple of guys that surfed, and I go, oh man, I love the beach. And so I started going as a very young, maybe year 7 or something like that, to the beach with them, and that became my escape. You know, I was separate from the little community where I was growing up. And I could go there and I could just be anonymous, and I could just surf and hang out with these guys. So that was where that passion, and that was my escape. But as I became to know the Lord through what we've already told, I had known about Christian Surfers, and I knew Brett Davis, the founder, a bit, you know, and so it was sort of a natural progression that, okay, now God actually is my life. He's restored me. I know so many people in this subculture that are as lost as I was, that what Brett has started is just got such tangible reality. Why wouldn't I want to be part of it? But that was a good 10 years after he'd actually started it that I actually got involved at a local level at Cronulla. Yeah.
Do you know much about how, the early days, just that 10 years before you got involved? Did Brett ever share those stories with you?
Yes, yeah. And there's an awesome book if you want to know it. There's a book called Groundswell, which just tells the story of Christian surfers. And if you don't like reading, there's actually an awesome coffee table version that goes with that, with lots and lots of pictures. So you can go that way, or you can read the actual novel as well. Yeah.
We can put that in the show notes too, so people can look it up.
Yeah, it actually is a very good read. But Brett Davis is the founder of that, and that was birthed out of his parents' house at Guyamere, and then his relationship with Guyamere Baptist Church after, in about 1977. They began that as just a Bible study. But really, just thinking on that point, there was a guy before Brett that Brett knows, and who was alongside him the whole way as they journeyed that. But his name's Jeff Thompson. And in 1976, he brought the reality of who God through Jesus is to Brett and changed his life and showed him that surfing and a belief in God can go hand in hand. So, if it wasn't maybe for Jeff's courage to share with another surfer that truth, who knows? It may not happen, but that's hypothetical. But that's God, the way He works. So Brett and Jeff and a few other guys started that movement out of his parents' lounge room, and then it wasn't only a couple of years after that, I think, they moved into the surf house in Cronulla and sort of created this drop-in space where anybody was welcome. And that was right on the corner of the Kingsway and Allure Road opposite Northy's Hotel there.
That was a pretty wild place. I've heard
lots
of great stories.
Wild things happened there, but just because people were free to be who they were, and there was no judgment, there was just acceptance, and the hope that people would see the reality of God through relationship, really,
You were talking to us before we started, Dave, about another passion of yours you really love, Silmarillion by Tolkien, and
great author.
That idea of singing a song, that God was singing a song over you, and he brings up that theme in the Silmarillion, one of his books, doesn't he, J.R. Tolkien?
Brilliantly, brilliant. Whether that's your genre or not, I would encourage you to just delve into that. Even read the first chapter of the Silmarillion that Stu's mentioned, because as I said earlier, I was just describing how I feel that God has that life song over us, and he describes his God character Ulvata as the creator, but birthing creation and life through song. And he begins to sing this beautiful song, and the angels gather round. It becomes this orchestral masterpiece. And as wherever that song, that music travels, it just births life, and yet there was the jealousy of another character called Melkor, who was a Satan-like character, but his motivation was purely jealousy. So he subtly begins to sing this discord that weaves its way into the song, but is not the true theme. And it begins to describe how those that knew the true music heard life, but those that listened to the discord thought it was truth. And wherever they followed the discord, life become less colourful, less joyful, less peaceful. And I think that's what life does to us. And, I was describing moving from Cornwall to here, and I'm buying that picture, but I never looked at that picture for years, because the experience of life tuned me to the discord rather than the song, and it took brokenness to let me hear that song again. But I think it's just such a rich concept, and so insightful by Tolkien to listen and write like that. But I think that that's birthed in me the reflection, and God years are never wasted. I could either look at those years in regret, or just thank God that I survived and that he can now use that to his glory. And so I think it's being part of Christian Surfers ministry and knowing that there are so many people that still experience that, like that, just that sense of loss, and that my purpose, I feel, is to just orientate people towards God through what I say and what I do, and so that as they become to reorientate their focus, that they may then hear their life song. And then that, in that true concept, will birth life and truth, with no other agenda but that they may know, and they may know truth, that they may, like John, 10:10 says, that they may know life and life to the full.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? It's really cool how Tolkien's a Christian, and he weaves in his stories of Middle Earth, he weaves his Christian background into those stories in a similar way that C.S. Lewis does with Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, 100%.
And when you were talking about Tolkien talking about the Word of God being like a song, I think Larry Norman picks that up in the early 70s with he did the first rock opera called The Tune, and he sings about a tune that God teaches us, and then we forget how it goes, and it gets all clunky, and then someone comes along and starts singing the tune again, but no one recognises it.
That's cool.
And apparently the Who heard that album, and that was what inspired them to write their rock opera Tommy. So
amazing.
So Larry Norman writing that story about God's tune actually inspired that, but that's been forgotten since then. But I think that's
I learned something new. That's
it's really interesting.
It's really develops that concept.
Yeah. There's a new book coming out about Larry Norman actually that says that the Beatles song "Get Back," Jojo was a man. Is that Get Back, I think. Jojo in that song is Larry Norman with hair down to his knees.
Wow.
So I don't know if it's true, but it's a cool story. But yeah, it's interesting how Christians have been in all sorts of different contexts influencing different people. And I think that's what's really exciting about today, about Christian Surfers, about having Christians like Jeff speak into someone's life, and then all of a sudden in a lounge room, that bursts an international movement. God can use faithful steps to do all sorts of things and get that song going again in the midst of all the. And I think that's a word of hope today, because a lot of Christians are really lamenting how, what's our next steps? Where do we go? There's all this cultural change happening around us, but actually sharing the tune, sharing the song with other people about Jesus, and living our lives to the full and offering that life to others is really exciting, I reckon. Yeah,
I agree. And CS is very much, as I said, it's an organic movement, but it's sometimes very much just a seed sowing ministry, in that we don't always see God's end game, but we don't need to, like there's so many times that I've just met people and just the way that I do life, just create conversations, create space. And I made a coffee for a guy that was working up on my road a couple of years ago. They were just road workers from the council. I was coming home, carried my board under my arm. He just has a chat to me. But I took him up a coffee and he goes, "Oh, I saw your shirt, man, when you got out of the car." And I had a CS shirt on. And he just simply goes, "Dude, I don't reckon I'd even still be alive if it wasn't for CS."
Yeah,
That's
right.
it.
Yeah. And he just reiterates this story to me of his life and how that had changed him. Like he wasn't saying, like, "Oh, I'm full on Christian now" or anything, but like he's just simply said, "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that time."
Wow. He might have been one of those young rat bags at the Christian Surfer's house one night, just
Yeah. He told me his story, like, and how that was, but I'm probably not at liberty to kind of share that in this space without his permission. But it was pretty cool. Like.
That is very cool. Yeah, it's cool.
You were saying earlier as well that the way you see that this song playing out, and for you that a couple of words you used just before we started recording was passion and purpose.
Yeah.
And that's born out of relationship. Do you want to tell us a bit more about why those two words, passion and purpose, why they're really profound for you, and then how you seek to engage others through the Christian Service community into those ideas?
Yeah, I think that they're, like I said, birthed out of relationship, and it's important. I think if we reflect back to what surfing is, like back when CS started, it was very much a fringe subculture, surfing, like it's not professionalized like it was now. It's pretty much still sex, drugs and rock and roll. And I think through our passions, we seek, to form an identity around that. And I think that's how subcultures form. Like people have a passion, and along with that becomes, an attraction to others that share that similar passion, and you get an identity birthed around those passions and the formation of a subculture. Unfortunately, everybody else brings life with that to that subculture, and so you end up owning fringe elements of that subculture that aren't really part of your passion and definitely not part of your purpose, but becomes just an accepted part, so you feel that you need to engage in some of that, and that's where I think your life song focuses on the discord more than the true song. And so my passion in that, if you like, is that through relationship into that subculture where you actually have traction because you share that passion, that you can begin to birth true purpose. And so then people can align, their passion in life with purpose, Otherwise, sometimes you can engage in that subculture and it becomes consuming, and you actually lose purpose and you become very lost. And so I think, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes heaps of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and so in that, it's like I was saying, that it's through relationship, what I say and do to orientate people to God, so that then they can hear the true life song for themselves, and then God will work that out with them, and you just walk alongside them for the journey.
Yeah. So as Christian surfers, there is a bit of a shock absorber element there, that there is those who, you guys are going into a particular subculture to be at the forefront of that cultural change and to bring Christ into that space. There's lots of different subcultures people can be a part of, but we all have their particular and unique discords.
Yeah.
When you think about the surfing culture, maybe in the 70s when you were first approaching that subculture, but even now in 2021, what are some of the particular discordant themes of people who are in surfing culture today that you need to speak life into?
Probably the first one that comes to mind, and I'm also, passionate about that too, because I've got two daughters that are young women now, but is the over-sexualization. And that goes across many themes in our society now, but the over-sexualization of women in that subculture, and even I was speaking to some of the young girls today, like, you know, you look at, this is part of our internship program we run. I was having this discussion around identity with them, and I said to some of the girls, like, what do you feel like when you go in to buy a wetsuit? And I was looking at some of them, and all the guys, you know, like now you're coming into spring, so you might have short arms, short legs, but the girls ones, like, I go, like, are you serious? Like, how does that even keep you warm? Like, they got short arms and then they're cut like a Brazilian bikini on the bottom, and I go, how is that functional? How is that actually keeping you warm? Yeah. It's just purely manipulating their identity. You know, so, and I think that's one, you know, I'm just using that as an example, exactly. But I think it's very important. So to actually help those young women be valued for who they are more than, you know, the image that's portrayed through media and marketing, you know. And so, you know, that's an example, but, you know, I could probably find many more, but that was one I was just speaking about last week.
Yeah, that's a good example, because that issue's come up in the Olympics, hasn't it? With the
100%,
and how they
right.
wanted to wear shorts and they weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
And that was crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah. And an example where that has actually brought change along that line too, not so much in the apparel, but we have had, like, about probably 5 years, it hasn't run now, but we have a surf contest called Jesus Pro-Am, and a number of guys that have been on the tour actually came through that as grommets too, but it was the first contest in Australia ever to give equal prize money to men and women.
Yeah, right.
And Sia started that.
It's really cool. You know the movie Puberty Blues?
Yeah.
I mean, you were a little bit ahead of me, but you and I grew up in Sydney around that time on the beach, and I went to Kirrawee High School, which was, you know, some of the book was set in Grace Point, which is where I live now. Do you think some of that was actual reality growing up? Do you think that there was some real toxicity around the culture in those days?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I agree without going into the details of that book. But I think very much, you know, like from where I, you know, just, growing up in that space, and, you know, the violence and the sex and the drugs, like I said, that was, it was very much part of it.
Yeah, my dad came from Sheffield, and he had the same experience as you. So he was a bit older. He was 18 when he came to Australia. Yeah. And the first day he went to a job in a national bank in Rockdale, he walked in and he said, "Oh, hi everyone, how you going?" And the first thing they said was, "Oh, look, blokes, there's a POMS just walked in." Yeah. And then someone said, "The only good POMS are POMS swimming out their heads with two Greeks under each arm," or something like that.
Yeah,
you know, just real racist stuff. And my dad said, "Oh my goodness, what have I stepped into?" Like, so there was a lot of that in Australian culture. And I think we've moved along from there, I think, but there's still elements of that, isn't there, in the Sutherland Shire today?
Yes, very much, unfortunately. I mean, across all areas, I think we tend to think we're not racist. Where that comes from, I'm not really sure, but I guess you go back to maybe our convict roots, I don't know, you know, the tall poppy syndrome as well. All those things have part to do with it, but we're not, I think, as a culture, as accepting as we think. I think it's very performance-based. Like, I grew up and I had, you know, a couple of Greek friends and Lebanese friends when we were young. Excuse me. But, you know, their acceptance was pretty much based not just on who they were. I can remember, and lots of people would call them, you know, the derogatory terms of wogs or lebs and so on, but they were actually really good surfers, and so their actual performance gave them respectability.
Right.
It wasn't actually just because of who they were.
Yeah.
And so,
so Christian surfers bring that to the culture, isn't it? It's saying
just general acceptance.
The story about speaking to the young women last week. It's like God values you for who you are, and we're all precious. We're all made precious in the eyes of God. Yeah,
and if we can learn that, you know, like what true humility is, and that X value that God puts on people. I think it was Tom Keller. Is it Tom Keller? Yeah. Tim, yeah, that's right. I didn't think I had it quite right. I was listening to something he was saying about, you know, this is just, you were saying acceptance, and we can only really accept people truly were if we understand God's value for us first, and that we can walk humbly, before our God, like Micah said. But he was explaining what true humility and meekness is, and I think in Australia that's a problem, like along those lines that you're saying. I think something that we don't really understand what that is. We think meekness and humility is a weakness, but he was saying that the true Greek word for that, I think it's praos, describes the meekness of a warhorse. So something wild that is tamed but responsive. And I thought, wow, that's
cool.
sick.
Yeah,
so
really
you're willing to go into war under guidance and being responsive to the one that you have submitted to, but it makes you no less stronger or purposeful.
Yep.
And I think once we know our life song, that we understand God's value for us, that gives us the strength and ability to focus others in that direction. Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah. One of the verses that came to mind as we were speaking about the different songs was the verse that Paul talks about in Corinthians, that for we are to God the pleasing aroma of Christ among those who are being saved and those who are perishing. To the one we are the aroma that brings death, and to the other an aroma that brings life. So there's the idea that we come singing that song of creation.
Yeah.
And there are those who will resonate with that, who are currently hearing that song of discord and will go, actually, that's a more beautiful song. As you're saying, that's part of your mission at CS is to be that aroma of life, is to come in and to be singing that more beautiful song to a place of discord, which is really lovely. Now, Christian Services has grown. It's no longer just something that happens at Cronulla Beach. Tell us about now this. It's now quite a large international movement. Tell us a little bit about how it's spread, which countries you're in, what the kind of the global presence looks like today.
Yeah, phenomenal story, and I really can only really say that it's had the breath of God on it. To go from a lounge room meeting in Guyamere with a handful of grommets to a presence in a surf house at Cronulla, to the first national conference. So really, from 77 to 83, so 5 years or so, like they had the first national gathering of people of like-mindedness in Stanwell Park at Stanwell Tops, and we're actually coming up next year to the 40th anniversary of that.
Oh, wow.
And so we're hoping that COVID permitting, that we can all meet same place 40 years later. There's an annual event that we have, but to have it back there. But anyway, so it grew that much in that 5 years. So like a realisation that God was speaking the same thing to people's hearts around the nation, and Brett purposely travelled around to meet and engage with people on that and formed this national identity. And then only less than 10 years after that, they decided, meeting with YWAM and a couple of other mission organisations, that they should have a meeting of like-minded people in Hawaii. So they actually had the first international conference, I think in the early 90s, maybe 92, I can't remember. You read the book and you'll know the date.
I like these plugs for the book, that's great.
But and then out of that, they actually birthed a thing called International Surf Ministry, I think it was first called, but they realised that, and this could be an important difference, they realised that a lot of those mission organisations were going out to visit people to try and, I don't know, using clinical language, but to convert them as such. But Brett quickly realised that his heart and the heart of CS was not to go and be over or come to something, but to actually be in and part of, and change that, or just bring change or reorientation I've been describing from the inside out, not coming in and over, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And so they actually moved away from that and formed Christian Surfers International, because the direction was different,
Yeah, and for those who have been following all the podcasts, last week we talked particularly about Andrew Root and one of his book in 2007, Revisiting Relational Youth Ministry. was kind of tapping on that same theme, that
Right.
there are ministries that go out and see the other people as targets in a really crass way, kind of almost dehumanize the other, because you're just there to make a missional object of that other person. And he's saying no, let's think incarnationally about this, using the incarnation, a lot of Lutheran theology, but he's that same idea as Brett's saying, that you come in with and stand alongside and create and share space with them. Place sharing is the phrase.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's right.
And in that moment, you are therefore being Christ there in amongst them, and able to tying the two languages together to sing that song.
Right.
To sing that more beautiful song in amongst the discord.
Yeah. Can I tell you a little story? I don't know how we're going for time, but just along that line of just listening to God in what you do and say. And so a few years ago now, one of the local Cronulla, just got to be careful not to say names, but like one of the local Cronulla leaders and I were meeting, and there's a great team around all those leadership beachfronts, but there was another group that came from outside. They had a slightly different belief structure around what they were doing. Could have been considered a bit cultish, but they saw what CS was doing, and they were quite servant-hearted and wanted to be part of it. And then there was this tension between some of the hand-printed tracts that they wanted to hand out, and what their sort of ethos was, and their heart for surfing and being part. And so there was this bit of tension developed, and a lot of the young leaders were saying to this other, just get rid of them. This is just trouble. It's going to break us. It's not who we are. And there's this whole lot of tension about, we don't like who. Anyway, there was a lot of conversation, and even my wife Wendy said to me, I can't mention her name because we've had this discussion a few times, but she even says to me, Dave, I reckon just cut them loose. It's just only going to get ugly, because some people in the community were saying, are these guys part of you? Like they said something to my kid about this. And so we were kind of putting out fires all the time. And so it was like, and I met with this guy, and I just had this sense that God's saying, just love them. And so I said to him, what's God saying to you? But, do you think that we need to? And he goes, I don't reckon, Dave. So we just started to meet with them and share and try to know one another a lot better than just fit into like this organisational structure that just let's know. But over a journey of a year, and we became an agreement on, okay, what are non-negotiables and what's, peripheral. And so anyway, to get to the end of that story, two of their young leaders they came to camps with us and so on, but on my deck we finished the year with a day and a barbecue of just sharing it at my place, and these two guys, I'm gonna cry thinking about it, but these two guys knelt on my back deck and go, thank you God, I never knew the love of Jesus was so real. And I'll never forget it. Imagine if I'd cut them out, if I'd just listened to the voice of the majority and gone, cut them loose. 1 year down the track, they're kneeling in tears before God going, I never knew the love of Jesus was so real.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Beautiful. And that's the difference between being there and coming in alongside and just doing life, or coming over in the top with an agenda, and so that's just is a tangible story. I think really that cool. I think that gives that concept traction anyway.
It does.
Yeah.
It's a great example.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah, one of the themes of this podcast has been how do you institutionalize ministry, which is seeking to do those relational type things, and without losing that. And that's a really beautiful story, just a very recent story for you to have heard that. What does it then look like to be, institutionalizing that model of ministry, but at a global platform?
Yeah, I think one of the strengths of Christian Surfers is that it's non-denominational for a start, so we don't have to take on and own some of those boundaries that when you're within an organisational structure like that. but we walk very carefully alongside and value those beliefs and things that people hold dear in tradition and so on. But I think it's walking hand in hand with people that come from those traditions and being willing to have the discussion. Like I explained with those young guys in Cronulla, that, okay, what is really a salvation issue and what is what is peripheral to that, and how can we actually focus on what's important and what's not important, and just be willing to have those conversations. So those conversations happen all around the world all the time for us, and culturally as well. And sometimes some countries we can't be as overtly Christian surfers. Like some countries have a pseudonym name because they can't really wear that religious banner, if you like, just for safety reasons more than anything else. Yeah. So we're willing to even compromise on that if you see that as a compromise. But they are big discussions.
There's a lot of mission organisations that do that, though, isn't it?
Yes, there are.
We had a couple go out from our church to a country where they couldn't actually overtly talk about the mission organisation that sent them. So, yeah, we've kind of travelled through some of those things too.
Yeah, and so you use, that passion of surfing as a relationship developer and then you work your way through that. But, that happens, and you asked me before where it's grown. Like I said, gave you a bit of picture between, those milestones. But now, 40 years down the track, we're pretty much on 40 different beachfront representations around this nation, and probably over 40 countries represented across the globe.
Can you share with us some of the countries that you're in?
Yeah, like the ones that have major presences, obviously America, England, South Africa, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Indonesia. Then there's a lot of other smaller countries that have presences there but not active mission groups, and then there's others that where it's happening in, or that I can't really mention as a country on live, but. Yeah, so there's quite a lot, and there's people continually working. So it's run into Christian Surfers International is now run out of South Africa. So the head office is in South Africa under the directorship of Roy Harley, who Brett Davis mentored into that, and he's an amazing leader. So yeah, we have Roy leading it as a movement, and Brett still sitting there as the founding father.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah,
I've got here on the website, christiansurfers.net, 38 affiliative nations, 175 local missions, and over 1,000 volunteer leaders.
There you go.
It's not bad for something that's birthed out of Cronulla. You were saying earlier as well that actually if you go down to Cronulla now, there's a plaque, is that right?
Yeah, when Cronulla a few years ago became registered Surf Heritage Reserve, so just for the history of surfing there, but one of the mentions on that plaque on the alley, if you go to the podium at the alley there, outside sea level now, but used to be Joe's Milk Bar. But it tells the story of the local board riders, but it mentions Christian surfers as the one board riders that has now become a international movement. Yeah.
That's really lovely. Stu, do you have any other questions you had to ask for Dave?
Yeah, Dave, I'm interested in a couple of things. Tell us first of all, what are some of the things that people can get involved with Christian surfers? Like you mentioned, you do you do some things like paddle for poverty. There's some other things. Do you want to give us a heads up on some of the things Christian surfers are doing at the moment? Yeah,
we do have just community events that people can be part of. But there is a way, if you really want to know a little bit more and regularly sort of update and want to know about what's happening, nationally and across the globe, you can subscribe to become what we call a team rider. And so you can buy into that if you want. So there is a team rider pack available through the website that'll give you CS merchandise if you feel like wearing a t-shirt or, but you'll get regular updates for that. But if you don't want to that gives some financial support with some representation that you get, a cap, t-shirt and so on. But you can just sign up for a regular newsletter that costs you nothing at all, and that'll keep you updated. You can go onto the CSA website and just have a look. So it's broken down into regions. So if you're listening to this in New South Wales, you go to New South Wales Central Region and you'll see all the missions or the beachfront representations listed there, and you can just make all the contact of those local leaders are there, so you can just see what's going on. You can follow us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, and then there's advertised through there are different events that you're welcome to be part of. One that you mentioned locally that we do, Paddle Against Poverty, which is again limited by COVID the last couple of years, but it's just you get a sponsor and you'd come and do a 5 to 9K paddle depending on how fit you're feeling on the day. But you don't actually just come and do it because there's plenty of support. There's jet skis there, there's a boat there, you get lagging in energy, just jump on the boat and they'll drop you back up the front of the pack and somebody will push you to the end. But it's just very welcoming, so just to be part of that. But that actually funds an international project that we look after called Mercy Huts in Indonesia, in West Timor, Indonesia, on the island of Rote. And we also have a compassion-based arm which is called Groundswell Aid, which just seeks to come alongside impoverished coastal communities globally. So there's a lot you can be aware of and just look into, and you could find a niche that you're interested in. If purely joining a local group to surf and hang out. Some of them run as competitive board riders, so if you've got that competitive edge, you could join the actual board riders. You can join social events, but yeah, there's plenty there.
It's all on the website.
All on the website, yeah.
Also, what do you see the future of Christian surfers? What are you excited about the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we looked 3 years. 5 to 10 years is a long way down the track. But probably in 10 years, I don't know, it's a bit like the mafia. You never leave the family, but how much of a role I'm going to have in 10 years, I don't actually know. But
what about 3?
Brett's always been there. But 3 years, we've really had a strategic look at what makes up the surf community. So obviously, it's changed from the very initial 70s concept of being a short board rider and, very male orientated, to now the diversity of craft that people ride, a total acceptance of, especially in Sutherland Shire or any beach community that you live in, it becomes like a very holistic part of your identity to go to the beach. And so it embraces now, partnership between surf clubs. Where back in the 70s, clubbies and board riders, there was nothing but fighting. Now there's this holistic sense of where we really can engage across the community, no matter what craft you ride, what your origins are, and so a very much deeper concept of what surfing is. And how we, like I said earlier, that it's quite fluid in how we meet the needs. And so our first focus is look at your community and see what you see as the greatest need on that beachfront is. So,
that's really cool. And for local churches too, what do you think is the role of local churches with CS? How can we work better together in that space?
I think is to just know who we are, to start get to know something about us. We have a lot of leaders in whatever, they go to a number of different churches, so we have good relationship with them, but I try and encourage those leaders to have a conversation with their pastor to let them know what they're doing and who they are. And so then if the church can be aware of that engagement of those young people that are in their church to start with, or what the movement's doing outside the church, is to firstly pray for them. There's a real strength that I see as in my position with working alongside and supporting those leaders, of the ones that have a strong, open dialogue with their church, and to those that are really relying on me or others around them to support them. So really we form a network of spiritual support, but the leadership of Christian surfers is very much servant-hearted. I mean, Jesus' model, isn't it? So we don't direct it from the top, we support it from the bottom up. And so, I think it's important. And sometimes, without due criticism, I think that's a hard concept for some churches. They like to take ownership of something. So if a leader goes to their church, they see it as a ministry of that church. And don't see that as a criticism. I think that's the model that happens sometimes. But to realise the strength of Christian surfers is firstly non-denominational, and that it has that fluid dynamic to adjust and change organically. But one of the changes very much that you might have been questioning is that we do have a very strong governance too, that complies with the law of the land. And so just with WHS, with child safety and all those policies that you have to be part of. Where if you look back in the 70s when it started, we probably would have ended up in, not through anything terrible, the church has gone through in some areas, but just through poor, especially WHS practice and just road rules, and also, it was quite raw and organic. You didn't have enough cars, you just jam them in the boot and drive them out to the reefs. What I mean? Like that sort of thing.
That's what everyone was doing.
So
back
governance,
in the 70s,
governance is grown and changes. Is very responsible. We have good, strong policies on all those legal issues, but we have the ability to be flexible and changeable because we have that organic origins, I guess, that seek to be innovative and authentic in what we do.
I think if I could ask one more question too, Tim, I was wondering, how can we pray for you personally and support things that you're doing, Dave, on the New South Wales Central Coast?
I think coming out of COVID, it's going to be, because it's changed a lot of the way that all of us have done life, isn't it? And so really getting some traction back with, even getting the Cronulla Board Riders thing back up and going, because we haven't been able to run that for a couple of years. Some leadership's waned with change over that time. So I'm really seeing that there'll be a newness and are looking for some new leadership in those areas. Just for a fresh vision, as people probably are a bit wearied by the period. They come out of it with excitement and enthusiasm. For myself, to be honest, I was sharing this in our vision planning over the last weekend, is that, I don't know, I'll be 60 pretty soon. And so that, just to have, I've been trying to grow some good leadership under me, but a question I put out to the whole national team was whether that's actually created a barrier. So I've been in my role for probably more than 15 years now, looking after
terrific.
that.
Yeah.
But whether people, that creates an unintentional barrier that people go, wow, is that something, I can't do that, Dave's been doing it too long, or whether I can actually create ownership of that. So I'm looking for somebody that, be willing to walk alongside and see the importance of taking that role on. So that's something you could pray about.
For, for sure. Yeah.
So,
well, mate, just personally, it's been delightful hearing the stories and having you on, and we'll have to get you on again, I reckon. Like, it'd be really
There's lots of stories, so I'm sure we do.
Look, I think we've
whether it goes back to punk rock or surfing, or there's lots we can talk about.
I think our next coffee we're going to be sharing some stories of some punk stories. But I thought that was really delightful, mate, and really encouraging. And thank you for your sharing with us about how CS is just really keen to introduce people to Jesus and to think that through so much. I think that's something that's really struck me on today's podcast, just to sit back and to pray about it and to think about how can we engage with people and help them, because there are people that are not listening to the song, and they're hearing it as a noise and a bad thing. How can we help get the gospel out today and keep thinking of new ways of doing it? So I think Christian Surfers is a fantastic example of that. So thank you, mate. That's really, from my point of view.
Just thanks for your interest.
Really interested.
It's been a good experience. So.
It's good.
To all you guys out there too, thanks for listening too.
Thanks, Dave. It has been really wonderful to be able to celebrate Christian Surfers and what God is doing amongst you guys and in that now international movement. So it's really great. Thanks for listening or watching, everyone. It's been great to have your company. I hope you've appreciated. Dave Lovell from Christian Surfers. As you mentioned, the book Groundswell, there's the text version or the coffee book version, so you can check those out. We'll have links in the show notes. Check out the two different websites, christiansurfers.org.au for the Australian one. If you're listening internationally, christiansurfers.net. We'll put those in the show notes as well, so you can find out more about what Christian Surfers is doing. You can sign up for newsletters, follow them on the Instagram, on the Facebook. In terms of the Shock Absorber podcast, of course, as always, like, subscribe, follow along. We've got lots more conversations coming up for this season. There's lots of other things that Soul Revival is doing as well. There's the Chip Lunch podcast, where we have conversations about what it's like growing up Christian, particularly being Christians in high school and adult years. We've had lots of great conversations on that podcast. And the Soul Revival digital gatherings you can also find on your podcast feed and on YouTube. But as we finish up, Dave, the last thing we like to do here is to give everyone a one way to Jesus.
But I think today it might be relevant if we give you the shuckers as well.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.